Hey guys, it is Peggy Dean of the Pigeon Letters, where I provide all the art resources for anyone who wants to create. I am today going to be showing you this really cute envelope with flowers that you can create in any way, any color, any place, anyhow on Procreate. So let's jump into it. We're about to have a lot of fun. All right, so I'm actually going to do a draft first, and I'm going to choose a dark color here so that you can see, and then I'm going to go over it later. So this is just to get the preliminary sketch down. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to work in portrait. So the first thing I want to do is draw just a basic rectangle so I have my general shape, and then I'm going to draw a triangle from the bottom. You can see that's a triangle shape. I curved the top. It doesn't matter when you're doing your draft, but just details to notice. And then I'm having these corners kind of do a slight curve, and they're going to go into there. You don't want them to go too low. Ideally, you'd have them even be higher. So I'm going to have mine go into about right here toward the tip of the envelope, like so. And then I'm going to have the flap. So the flap, let's say it comes down to about here. That's this much space. So if I bring that up, it's going to be about here. So I can do my flap up like this and call it good. So there's my rough sketch. I'm going to turn the opacity down on that layer by going to the layer, pressing N. That's going to be my normal blend mode, but I'm going to go to opacity and just bump that down quite a bit so that I just know it's there as my reference. Next, I'm going to choose a new layer and choose the color that I want my envelopes to be. And I'm not set on my envelope color, but just to get you started. Okay, so I'm on the brush that I want, which is the ink brush. It's got that nice texture to it. And I'm going to draw each shape, almost each shape, on its own. So the first one that I want to draw is the main rectangle. And the reason why is because you could do this the triangle, but I'm doing the whole thing just so that I know that all these spaces are covered. And it's okay if you go outside of your own lines because it's just a draft. We're getting rid of that underneath. So once this is done, I have this in. I can fill it by pulling my color dropper in. Don't worry that it's covering it perfectly. We're going to add texture in just a minute. But from here, I'm actually going to take my eraser tool and soften this edge just a little bit so it's not so sharp. Yours can be super sharp if you want them to be. Also, if you want to create a perfect square, you can, actually I'll start over here so you can see it. Hold it in place like this and then put one finger on it. It does your square, but basically this is going to make it so that your lines are straight. I'm not doing my lines straight because I like the imperfect look that the hand brings. Okay, so from here I am going to lighten that up a little bit just so that I have, it's just a little bit lighter because it's on the inside. You could also darken it because it's on the inside, but I want this to be basically kind of like my afterthought. I'm going to drag the layer underneath so that I can see my sketch layer still. And then I'm going to create a new layer. And then I have that same color that I initially had, and I'm going to, you can either draw directly on top of it, but if you want to maintain the same shape without going and having this bulky area outside that line, you can work on a clipping mask. So to do that on the new layer, you're going to select it and then say clipping mask. And so see, anything that I do on this layer only affects the previous layer. So that's where I can bring this up, connect, make sure to connect it. So I brought it back through and then connected it because otherwise it would fill the whole page when I did my color drop. Okay, so that's in there. And then I want to do my inside flap, and because it's the inside of it, it's going to probably be the same color as this. So on a new layer, I'm going to select that color, and then I'm going to draw, create a new layer, and then I'm going to draw that flap in. And the reason that I'm working on the separate layer is so that I can have a bit easier time shading and whatnot in each space. But you could totally do this on the same layer as that color if it's preferable, but you'll see why this is easier in a sec. Smoothing this out a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to do these triangles basically that are part of the flap in. So I'm going to select this color, and then I'm actually going to make it a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to go back to this clipping mask and select a layer on top of it and then do another clipping mask. And it's not going to clip to the layer beneath it because that one is clipped to this rectangle. So what that's going to do is, as many times as there's a clipping mask on top of that one, it's going to clip to the main layer that is, you get it. It's going to clip to that rectangle also. And then before I do that, I'm actually going to drag this down to the very bottom because I don't want it to anything over here to interfere with this this part of the drawing, because otherwise it might overlap and then you won't see it. So I'm going to bring this corner in, and notice how real quick I'm not following my guide right here because the edge is actually way over here. So I'm going to, if you want to turn your draft off wherever mine is and see what I'm talking about, if I bring this down here, I'm actually going to want that to be underneath that layer so you can see. There we go. And then the same thing on this side. You don't really need your guide at this point, but you totally can still use it if you want to. And then see how I'm just connecting each spot and it's creating that effect. So real quick, the reason why my envelope has this piece separate from this piece is because there's going to be a crease in here. And I want to be able to work on each of these independently of each other. So for example, if I apply a clipping mask, which we're going to do in a sec, to this layer, and then I create some depth, it will keep that nice line so that it insinuates kind of a crease, if you will. These colors are a little too different for what I'm doing, so I'm going to go in here and lighten this one a bit. Oh, I don't want to change the opacity though, because that will see through. So I'm going to go to my wand tool, I'm going to go to recolor and then drag it where I want it to go. And then I can watch the color change live, which makes things a lot easier. So I'm going to get it to where you can still see separation, but it's much closer to the actual color. Okay. And then you can do the same thing with really anything around any of the colors. So now is where I get to have fun with my texture. And so the first thing I'm going to do is work on this layer. I'm going to create a layer on top of it and apply a clipping mask. So that's going to snap to this layer. And then I have a few brushes that I love. So again, if you want to follow along with me with these texture brushes, you can find the link. The first one I want to use is called Holy Fill. And there's cute names in here because of the storybook theme. Let's see, where did it go? Here it is, Holy Fill. And it looks like this. So see where if I'm going to add any sort of depth, I still have that line for that crease, which is awesome. And if the crease isn't exactly as sharp as you want it to be, you can go to that initial layer, grab like your eraser, and come through and get a sharper line by erasing just that one area of the top of this shape. Like so. So that makes it really easy. I'm actually going to go even further. Okay, so then you're adding that shading without messing with either of these areas. It makes it so much easier. So in that, I'm going to grab that color and then just go a little bit deeper. Maybe make this a little bit smaller. See what I mean? Now, if this happens to you where you accidentally hit an area that you didn't mean to, then you can just sample the color that is the main color there and then just go over it again. So see how it's just lightening that up with the original color. So that way you can still have this effect, but just make it not as harsh because you are going in with the same brush, just that same color. So this is going to lighten it up and have it be exactly what I want it to be. Now, I can do this also on the inside, and I'm going to want a little bit of texture coming from the crease, of course. So what I want to mention here is when I go, which one? This one. When I do this, I'm going to select a new clipping mask. I'm going to change the color. So it's not going to be the same as this because I want there to be a difference where you can actually see a crease. So like this would work because I didn't use that blue. But I could also go even lighter. Maybe even lighter than that, where it has more of a highlight, which is kind of giving the illusion that like this part, if I was to work on this layer again, that like this is the area that's more shadow, and then this is the area that is lit up. But what I also want to do is, go into the clipping mask on the rectangle and add a lot more depth coming from inside the flap. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this entire area in this texture just because I love texture. So that's really bringing that in and adding texture so there's no flat color. And then I can go and make this darker. And then if you make it larger, you can work where it's just kind of shading in a little bit. Or if you make it smaller, it's more concentrated, but you have to get closer. So there's that nice crisp line. So play with shading. And then you can also play with the color of it. So like, let's say I don't love this color. I can go in, select the area that I want it to recolor, not that area. Kind of have to be careful with the texture if it's all in the same layer because you want to grab, whoops, you want to grab the right thing. There we go. So you can change the color. You could either do the recolor tool or you could go into the hue and saturation. So I'm just going to bump this into a more of a periwinkle, and then you can make it brighter, darker, increase the saturation more, decrease it. So play with those as well because that will also change things here. You'll notice too, once you start adding texture everywhere, that you're going to have blank spots like this if you don't do that everywhere. So I'm going to go back to that layer and apply that texture here as well. Another way to differentiate that though is by using different texture brushes so they're not all the same. So like I could make my shadow brush like this Gretel detail if I want to, and then I can make this shadow. Which layer am I on? Okay, I can make this shadow like a different texture where it's covering more ground, basically. The other texture I liked, what was it? Little Prince. I love the names of these. Yeah, this one. Okay, so it's like pressure sensitive, so it can be like that, or it can be real light, and then the more you layer, the more texture will come onto it. And this is a little too dark for what I want right at the moment, so I can change colors if I want to, but yeah, so that's kind of like another way you can differentiate it. Sometimes people like flat shadows, so that's something to think about too. So however you want to do that, I'm just going to do this lightly though, because I just want it to be enough to make it a little different. And then I'm going to go back to that original color and just kind of go over it on top so that it's not as harsh. There we go. Okay, so you can see that crease in there. You don't have to keep the crease light either. You could make it so that it is darker, just like we did in this shadow, which I actually want to add even more. So I'm using this new brush, this Little Prince brush, to really bring that shadow up. And then maybe a little bit deeper, closer to the edge. So basically it's like it goes out, and then the closer that it gets to that fold, it's creating even more depth. And then if you need to lighten anything up, you can always go back with the same color and do that. Okay, but yeah, so you can take that color up to the top here and make that much darker instead of being a light crease. just with this shading technique like this. So it's totally up to you how you want to do that. And if it's folding that way, then you might want to add some additional shadow as if the flap is coming in like this. And the smaller that you make the brush, the more fine these details will be. And then if you stick to the main edge of the shape, the more crisp it will be. There we go. And then I actually want to lighten this up a little bit more. Another thing that you can play with is the opacity of the, the opacity of the shading. So like, let's say you love the shading, it's just overall a little too dark for you, then you can go in and lighten that up a little bit. So that's another way to play with that. So lots of different ways to get the outcome that you're looking for. Okay, so I want to do the same thing then to these flaps. So I'm going to go to the triangle shape, and I am going to, the difference here is that I can't apply a clipping mask to a clipping mask, so I'm actually going to take 2 fingers, drag it to the right so it alpha locks. It's essentially the same thing, but it's only basically whatever I do, I am still working on that layer. So this is a destructive workflow. You won't be able to like toggle it on and off like this, but you will be able to work only on the pixels that are on that layer. So I'm going to select this color. Actually, I'll select this darker color and then go darker than that. And then I'll grab this Golden Hill. This might be a little bigger than I want it to be, but I can always make it smaller. So I just want to do the edges of this one, which is why I like this texture brush, because it's not going to go everywhere. It's just enough to create a little bit of dimension. Okay, so that looks good to me. I might even go less than that so I can sample this color again and then just bring it on down a little. There we go. Okay, so now I have this envelope done. And while that may have been a lot, what it is doing is it's showing you how you can make this work for your workflow and make it work to what you want it to do. So from here, what I want to do is you can merge layers that you're happy with, or you can keep them separated. I'm going to just merge them because I know I like them, but I'm only going to merge the top 2. And the reason why is because I want to work inside of these guys. So I actually will merge these ones and that one. But if I turn, yeah, that's a problem. Okay, so you got to keep that clipping mask on. But I want to work with flowers now. So I'm going to open a new layer, grab a color for stems, go back to my ink brush, and then create stems that are coming out here. The only problem with this is I can't turn off that clipping mask, so I have this issue. So you can just go in and erase the parts that are sticking out there. Okay, so those are my flower stems. You can add leaves if you want to. So I'm just going to do that by coming off of the stem, doing an S curve. So it comes out and then through like this, out and then connects. So that's a C curve with an S curve. And then I can fill that. Whoops. Fill it. So if that happens to you, it's usually like with texture brushes, there might be a break somewhere in here. This is where your color threshold comes into play. So I can bring this over and then keep holding on and slide it to the left. And that's making the threshold not at 100%, and it won't grab to like everything. So it won't come out of the line there. Oops, that's not what I want. That's a flower area. Okay, so leaf. I could put a leaf right here. So add some leaves in. And And then from here I can add flowers. So before I add those, I'm going to add a new layer because I'm going to work on depth with the leaves. It won't be as intense because you now know the process. So I'm going to grab a different color. I love working in limited color palettes. So I would find, like, let's say my envelope's one color, my leaves are another color. What's going to complement those really well together? This orangey coral would look good. These pinks would look good. I'll go with the orangey color. Make sure I'm on a new layer. And then for these flowers, this is gonna probably be weird, but I'm actually just going to do little blobs like this. Maybe not so big. Blob. Don't worry, it's gonna make sense in a little bit. So basically I'm just doing like a circle that is imperfect, that has some variations in the like dips and ripples or whatever, wavy lines. Okay, so from here, I'm going to create a new layer, add a clipping mask, and then I have this color. I'm going to get it a little bit darker, maybe not that dark. And then create, that's not a clipping mask, now it is. And then create areas that just have like essentially petals coming up like this, and then I could do another one like right here, connect, and then you could go in between those layers, so underneath that red another clipping mask, and then go even darker and have a petal right there as well. So it's up to you how much you really want to layer. That petal looks a little bit weird there. But basically like the center of a flower. So I'm going to grab that color again, go to this one, and then add these weird lines that are creating petal areas. And you don't need that center because, as you can see, it's already giving that illusion of being like a flower that's kind of open. But if you want to, just create that layer in between, and then have, like, it doesn't even have to be a petal, it could just like kind of be a circle that shows the depth inside of the flower. That doesn't have to make a lot of sense because when you look at it fully, it looks like it's intentional. So from here, I'm going to go back to my leaves, create a layer on top of that, add a clipping mask, sample that leaf color, and then go darker. Now I'm going to grab a texture brush again. So this time I'm going to grab Hansel. And then you can see it creates this really pretty textured line effect. And I'm going to apply this, whoops, to the base of this leaf. And I'm going to do it to this side. So basically I'm working just up until the line of like where the vein of the leaf would be. And do the same thing here. So I'm just like splitting the color basically. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottoms of these stems. So I'm just kind of bringing down the depth there. And that's it. So from there, I can add even more depth by going darker toward the base, just kind of flicking my pen upwards so that it is not really grabbing all of it, but like the edges here. So that just is adding that extra depth. And then I can do, like, let's say I can grab a different, like, diamond queen here. This is a cool texture. I can just grab the bottom of this leaf. Maybe I'll do just more of the edge there. Okay. So see, I'm kind of going fast. It's not something I'm putting too much effort in. And then what I'm going to do is just decrease the opacity a little bit so that there's just texture enough to where you can see some dimension. Okay, so same thing here. I'm going to add a clipping mask to the base of these, and then I'm going to grab a darker color and come in here and just add some peekaboo texture from, I don't like this color, so I'm going to change it, but peekaboo texture from inside the petals, and then I can change that color. That's better, where it's more saturated. And then I'll alpha lock this one for these petals. It's a good color for outside too. And then just add a little bit of texture toward the bottom, which kind of acts as shading. And then I want to clean this one up just a little bit because it's a little too much. So I just grab the same color. It's actually a little bit darker, so it blends well. Okay, and that is it. That's all you have to do. You can, of course, go back in and add line work if you like to add line work. You can change the background color and make that be like, you know, a nicer presentation that way. Another thing that you can do with these flowers is, I'm going to group them all together real quick so I can show you. You can bring them down like this and then just remove. This is going to be really sloppy, but it's just going to give you an idea. And then, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Get rid of it so that they're all kind of peekabooing here, and I could clean that up if I wanted to. So basically you can do a lot with this and then have it be a really awesome illustration. So if this is helpful, then please make sure to turn on your notifications so that you get more tutorials like this. Also be sure to grab these brushes because they are awesome. Again, I've linked them so that you can just easily snag them. And then if you do something, I'd love to see it if you do this tutorial. So tag me on Instagram at The Pigeon Letters. Otherwise, visit thepigeonletters.com. I've got lots of freebies for you all the time. And I will see you next time.